Lay down, for a moment, the exact weight that has been sitting between your shoulder blades since before you can remember picking it up. Not the debt someone in your family talks about like a fact of nature. Not the diagnosis you keep bracing to inherit. Not the sentence a grandmother spoke over your future before you were old enough to argue back. Not the tally you keep in your head. Every door that closed on you, and every door that closed on your father before you. I am not asking you to carry that one more step. Before this message ends, I want your arms empty enough to receive something else instead. I see you, the one who checks the account balance already knowing the number before the app even finishes loading. I'm not far from that kitchen table. The man who reads every flat tire, every late notice, every job that fell through as more proof his last name was cursed. He has not been reading me correctly. There is a sentence that got handed down through your family faster than any inheritance ever did. Something about your kind never getting ahead. Never the ones who catch a break. You have repeated it so many times it stopped sounding like an insult. It started sounding like a fact. None of that sentence came from my mouth. None of it came from me. I know the exact shape of a name you did not choose and a story you did not write. Why does the same pattern keep repeating, generation after generation, as if it were owed? Notice something with me first. Ask yourself honestly where you first heard that your family was the kind that never gets ahead. It was not a verse I spoke. It was a tired adult, exhausted from carrying real weight, with no help in sight. They reached for the only explanation that made the exhaustion feel like something other than random cruelty. Calling it a curse gave the pain a shape. It gave the person carrying it something to point to. I understand why that explanation felt truer than any other, at least at the time. But it was never the only explanation, and it was never mine. What would it change if the weight you carry were simply too heavy for one person? Not a punishment aimed at you, just too heavy. It would not make the bills smaller. It would not make the diagnosis less frightening. But it would mean you are not fighting me. Not every time you struggle. The exhaustion you feel is not evidence that you are failing some test I designed. There is no test. It would mean you have been carrying it alone. Something never meant to be carried alone. The woman who apologizes for asking for anything, even in prayer, has cut her own request in half. She never even noticed. The father working the second job still feels one bad month from losing everything. Everything he built. He has stopped telling anyone that. A young man sits in his car before a shift he cannot afford to lose. He runs the same numbers he ran last week. And the week before. The numbers never change. Only the dread attached to them. Somewhere in your house there is a drawer with a folder you have not opened in months. You already know what is inside. You flinch at good news before you even finish hearing it. You wait for the second half of the sentence that always takes something back. I know that flinch. I was there for every version of it. A daughter grew up watching her mother whisper the same worried phrase every time rent was due. Now she catches herself whispering it too, word for word. In a kitchen, 3 states and 20 years away from that one. A son learned early where his father's temper came from, somewhere older than either of them. A grief nobody in the family had a name for. He has spent his whole adult life bracing, waiting for the moment it surfaces in him next. There is a man who has stopped opening certain envelopes. Not the day they arrive. A part of him has decided bad news travels faster in his family than good news ever has. There is a grandmother somewhere praying the exact prayer you are praying right now, in a different language, over a different name. She asks the same question underneath all of it. Why does it always land on us? I hear every one of those prayers. I have never once mixed them up with a sentence I handed down. Some of you carry this in your body first, long before you ever carry it in your thoughts. A tightness across the chest, the moment a phone rings later than expected, a stomach that clenches around the 15th of every month, no matter how the numbers actually add up. Some of you carry it in a marriage, watching for the same argument your parents used to have, half convinced you married into the pattern rather than into a person. Some of you carry it alone in a waiting room, filling out a family history form, hesitating over which boxes to check. You wonder how much of what happened to them is now written into what happens to you. None of you are wrong that the weight is heavy. You have simply been wrong about what it means, and about whether it has to be carried this way for one more generation. Let your eyelids fall closed right here, on this sentence, and hold that quiet for one unhurried breath before you open them again. You do not need to explain the weight to anyone in this moment, not even to me. I already know its exact shape. Here's what I need you to hear before we go any further. The weight you have been carrying is real. I am not telling you the bills are imaginary, or the diagnosis fake, or the grief overstated. What I am telling you is that this was never yours to carry alone, and it was never a verdict about who you are. A burden and a curse are not the same thing. Exhaustion just makes them feel identical after enough years. A burden is something too heavy for one set of shoulders. A curse is a sentence someone convinced you that you deserve, but you never did. You have been treating the first like the second for a long time. That confusion has cost you more rest than the actual weight ever did. Far more. Here is where that confusion breaks. A curse is inherited whether you consent to it or not. It needs nothing from you but your last name. A burden is different. Carried things can be handed to someone else, shared, set on a stronger back, put down at a door, and left there. What you have been calling a curse your whole life was, almost every time, an unshared burden. A real weight, dragged by too few hands for too many years. It was mistaken for a sentence because nobody ever showed you it could be set down instead of only endured. You do not need permission to set it down. Somewhere between a sermon you half heard as a child and a silence nobody ever explained, you were handed a version of me, a version that keeps a ledger of family debts. It assigns them like a landlord assigning rent. This house owes, this line owes, this name owes. Pay up. Or keep suffering until someone finally says the right words to release you. That God checks a list before deciding whether your prayer qualifies. That God requires the correct incantation, spoken with enough conviction, typed into the right comment section at the right hour. Then, and only then, does anything change. That God is not me. I have never once kept a ledger of who in your bloodline still owes me something. Not before I would help the one standing in front of me now. Here is where that lie breaks. A landlord God would need you to earn the release. The right performance, the right words, the right amount of belief, measured like a fee at the door. I am not a landlord. I built the door. And I have been standing on your side of it the whole time. The whole time you were afraid to knock. The version of me that assigns misery to a bloodline like a curse written into a will was never mine. It was a shortcut. Something someone reached for when they could not explain suffering any other way. It got handed to you the way old furniture gets handed down. Nobody ever asked if you wanted it in your house. This shows up in more places than you might expect, wearing different clothes depending on where you grew up. Sometimes it looks like a candle lit for the exact right saint on the exact right day. as if I only respond to precise instructions. Sometimes it looks like a phrase repeated exactly 7 times in a row. Someone once said the number mattered more than the heart behind it. Sometimes it is simply a grandmother's warning, passed down without any religion attached at all, that certain families are simply marked. Nothing to be done but endure it quietly. Underneath every version is the same lie wearing a different accent, that I am distant enough to need a password, stingy enough to withhold rest until you find it. That is the lie, not a God who requires the exact ritual before he moves. Not a God who tracks which relative still owes a debt before he answers the one praying now. Not a God who hands out misery like a landlord assigning back rent to a tenant who never signed the lease. A father who has been standing at the door the entire time, waiting only for you to stop knocking with the wrong key. I did not write curses into families the way debt gets written into a mortgage. What actually happens is simpler and sadder than that. Pain repeats because nobody around you ever put it down. So you learn to pick up the same load, out of pure habit. The way a child learns to carry a bag before anyone tells them they can ask for help with it. You watched someone you love carry fear like it was strength. You copied the posture without meaning to. You watched someone swallow every hard feeling instead of naming it. You learned that swallowing was what strong people did. None of that was me writing a sentence over your family. That was grief being passed hand to hand. Nobody ever stopped the chain. I am standing at the end of that chain now, and I am not asking you to add another link. Think about how weight actually gets passed between people. Nobody hands you a burden with a written explanation attached. It comes through a raised voice you learn to flinch at. A silence. One that taught you certain subjects were not safe to bring up. A way of holding money like it might disappear if you loosened your grip for even a second. You inherited a posture, not a sentence written in the stars over your family name. Posture can be unlearned. A courtroom verdict cannot. That difference is the whole reason I am asking you to look at this weight differently. Look before you decide there is nothing to be done about it. I am not selling you a ritual. I am not telling you that saying a specific word into a comment section will make a debt disappear on command, or that repeating an incantation with enough feeling will trigger a miracle. Right on schedule. Anyone offering you a magic phrase that breaks generational pain the moment you type it has misunderstood what actually changes a life. What changes a life is not a spell. It is a relationship. One old enough and steady enough that you finally stop needing the spell. Long before this message, I told a tired people through one of my writers to cast their burden on me. I would sustain them. I would not allow the righteous to be shaken forever. Notice the verb. Cast, not manage. Cast, not carry a little more efficiently. Something you cast leaves your own 2 hands entirely. It lands in someone else's. That was never a spell either. It was an invitation to stop gripping so tightly, offered to people who had every reason, by the standards of their own family stories, to believe nothing would ever be different. If the weight I'm describing has a name in your chest right now, you do not have to announce it to anyone. But if you want to, leave the word rest exactly where you are, right in this moment. And let that be the whole prayer. I want to tell you about a different kind of load. There is one I have actually offered you, and it looks nothing like what you were expecting. Picture a field a long time ago. 2 oxen bound together at the neck by a single wooden bar, walking the same furrow. That bar is called a yoke. Farmers built them by hand. A good farmer would carve the wood to fit the particular animal wearing it, so it would not rub the skin raw, not across a full day's work. A poorly made yoke chafed. A well-made one barely felt like anything at all. The weight was distributed, shared, shaped around the one who wore it. In the world these words were first spoken into, there was another use for that same picture, a heavier one. Teachers of the law were said to place a yoke on their students, a whole way of carrying obligation, a whole set of rules to keep, a whole burden of proving yourself acceptable through performance. Some of those teachings were so heavy that grown men described their own religion as something they were exhausted by, not comforted by. People showed up to worship carrying guilt like luggage, terrified of getting one more rule wrong, convinced that acceptance had to be earned, one exhausting requirement at a time. A farmer training a young, untested animal would sometimes yoke it beside an older, stronger one. Not so the young one could stop pulling. So the weight would never fall on it alone. It would learn the rhythm of the walk from a body already used to the field. Most of the people listening that day were farmers, fishermen, day laborers, all living under an empire that taxed them for existing. They worried about the same harvest their fathers worried about. They watched their own children inherit the same debts, the same worn hands. They did not have the luxury of pretending the weight was small. It was not small. Into exactly that crowd, tired from years of trying to outperform a curse they could never quite outrun, one sentence was spoken that nobody there had heard, offered quite that way before. Before you read the next sentence, hold whatever breath is sitting in your chest right now for one slow count, and let all of it go at once. The way you would finally set down something you had been gripping far too tightly for far too long. Now stay with me for these next few lines. This is what I said. Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Read the order of it slowly, because the order is the whole point. It does not say, come to me once you have proven yourself worthy of rest. It says, come to me while you are still laboring, still heavy laden, still carrying the exact weight we have been naming this whole time. All who labor, not the ones who labor well, not the ones with a clean family history, not the ones who never inherited a broken pattern. All. That word was not written for people who had already figured out how to fix themselves. It was written for the ones still in the middle of the field, still bent under the load, still flinching at good news. Then notice what comes next, because this is the part people skip past too quickly. It does not say lay the yoke down and walk away with nothing on your shoulders. It says take my yoke upon you. A yoke is still a yoke. There is still weight involved in a life. What changes is who is bound to the other side of the wooden bar. You are not being asked to carry nothing. You are being asked to stop carrying it alone, bound instead to someone whose strength does not run out, not by the afternoon. Someone who built the yoke himself and shaped it to fit exactly the shoulders wearing it now. Learn from me, he says. Not learn a set of rules to add to the pile. Learn the character of the one sharing the load. The next line tells you exactly what that character is like. Gentle and lowly in heart. Not a landlord auditing your debts. Not a judge waiting for the correct password. Gentle. Lowly. The kind of strength that bends down rather than the kind that stands over you with a ledger. And then the promise underneath the promise. You will find rest for your souls. not for your circumstances first, not for your bank account first, not for the diagnosis first, though I am not indifferent to any of those. Rest for the soul is the deeper repair, the kind that lets a person breathe again even before the outward situation has fully turned. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Easy does not mean nothing. Light does not mean weightless, it means shaped to fit. It means built by someone who measured your particular shoulders. Measured them before he ever asked you to wear it. Notice, too, what this sentence never once asks for. It does not ask you to first prove your family history has been cleared of every old pattern. It does not ask you to speak a phrase with perfect faith, not before the offer becomes valid. It does not mention a comment, a candle, a specific hour, or a required amount of belief measured out like a fee. It asks only that you come, still carrying what you are carrying. Let the yoke be shared instead of solo. That is a completely different requirement, different from the one you have been living under. A curse waits behind a locked door for the right password. A shared yoke is already fastened before you finish asking. A curse assumes you deserve the weight. A shared yoke assumes only that you are tired. A landlord tallies what your family still owes. He does it before deciding whether to help. The one carrying the other end of your yoke does not check the ledger at all. He already tore it up. He did it the day he described his own heart, in exactly the words we just read together. That description is the opposite of every landlord god you were ever handed, and it was placed exactly there, in the middle of this sentence, on purpose. Say that description over slowly because it is doing more work than it looks like it is doing. Not harsh, not keeping score, not towering over you, waiting for a mistake to justify the weight you have been made to carry. A heart built that way does not assign curses. It does not punish a family for something an ancestor did generations before anyone alive today was even born. It kneels down to help carry what is already too heavy. That is the exact opposite of everything you were taught to fear. Look back now at the very first thing I said to you. Lay down the exact weight that has been sitting between your shoulder blades. I did not say lay it down and carry nothing ever again. I said lay it down long enough to let me put a different one on you. One I built. One that fits. One shared between the two of us. The heaviest part of it rests on me, not on you. That is the trade being offered. Not the absence of weight. The presence of a stronger back next to yours, right beside you. My son knew exactly what a real yoke of suffering felt like before he ever offered you an easier one. He carried a wooden beam across an open shoulder wound, up a hill, in front of a crowd that had already decided his story was finished. He was handed the heaviest weight a human body has ever carried, the most humiliating too, and he did not put it down halfway. He carried it all the way to the place where it looked like it had won. Then he stood back up on the other side of it. The weight of that beam was never the end of the story either. I let my own son carry the very worst of it, so that gentleness could still be true on the other side of Good Friday. I am not going to hand you a curse-breaking incantation and call it love. I already gave the heaviest thing I have to give. The very heaviest. I am not telling you that every debt in your bank account disappears the moment you finish hearing this, or that the diagnosis your family fears will reverse itself on a date you can circle on a calendar. Anyone promising you a guaranteed timeline stapled to a curse-breaking phrase is not describing anything I have ever done. I'm not telling you that you will see a dramatic miracle by the end of today simply because you believed hard enough while reading this. That kind of promise turns me into a vending machine that only works for the loudest, most desperate coin. I have never once operated that way. I never will. What I am telling you is that the deepest weight, the one about who you are, whether you are marked for repeated failure, whether your family's worst chapter is also your only inheritance, that weight I am lifting completely. I am not waiting for a comment, or a candle, or the right words said with the right feeling. I am waiting for you to stop carrying it like a life sentence. Start carrying it like a burden someone offered to share. So here is something small you can actually do with the rest of your day. Find one thing you are physically holding right now, even something as small as your own two hands clasped together, and let it go slightly looser than it was a moment ago. Say, quietly, to yourself or to me, one true sentence about the weight you have been calling a curse. Something like, "This was too heavy for me to carry alone, and I am tired of pretending it wasn't." You do not have to solve the whole pattern today. You do not have to fix your family's whole history in one sitting. Just try it once. It will probably not feel like much of anything changed. Try it again tomorrow, and the day after, the way you would return to any relationship worth having. And somewhere around the 30th time you say it, you may notice your shoulders have started to sit differently than they used to, without you deciding to make that happen on purpose. If you want a second small thing, try naming the exact sentence that got passed down to you. The one about your family never getting ahead, or always being the ones bad news finds first. Out loud once in a room where nobody else can hear you, and then say after it, "That was a habit, not a verdict." You are not betraying anyone, not by putting it down. You are simply refusing to hand it to whoever comes after you. If you have children or nieces or a younger sibling watching how you carry things, this matters. More than you realize. They are learning the posture you model, the same way you learned yours. Setting this weight down is not only for you. It is the first link in the chain that finally gets to stay broken instead of getting handed forward. One more time. The chain stops with you. Strength that waits on me is not the same as strength you manufacture on your own. Those who wait on me will find that strength renewed, again and again. The way a bird finds the exact current of air that lets it rise without beating its wings any harder than before. You will not run this race by gritting your teeth tighter than you already have. You will run it lighter. The weight finally has two sets of shoulders under it, not just one. You are allowed to carry this slowly. Nobody sets a lifetime's weight down in a single sitting, and I am not asking you to. Carry this into the rest of your week the same small way. When the old sentence about your family surfaces, and it will, probably sooner than you would like, you do not have to argue with it out loud or convince anyone else it is untrue. You only have to notice it. Name it as a habit rather than a verdict. Hand it back to me one more time. Some weeks that will feel like nothing has changed at all. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, you may notice you flinched a little less at the phone ringing than you used to, or that you opened the envelope the same day it arrived instead of leaving it in the drawer. That is what a shared yoke actually looks like from the inside. It rarely announces itself. It just gets a little lighter, week after week, because it was never meant to move alone. You will not fix an entire family's history in a single afternoon, and you do not need to. What you need is one honest moment, repeated often enough. A moment where you stop calling a shared burden a curse, where you start calling it exactly what it is, a weight two sets of shoulders were always meant to carry. The weight was never proof of who you are. The weight was proof of how long you had been carrying something built for two. You do not need permission to set it down. It was never a debt owed by your bloodline. It was a burden. one nobody around you knew how to share. It was never a sentence handed down about your future. It was a habit passed hand to hand, until someone strong enough finally stepped in to carry the other end. Your exhaustion did not disqualify you from this rest. It was the whole reason the invitation was written. The yoke I am offering fits. The rest I am offering is real. And it does not depend on the right words. Not the right words said at the right hour. It depends only on you finally letting go of what was never built for one set of shoulders. Amen. There is a short page left for you in the pinned comment, written for the exact weight this message just named. Something meant to be reread the next time your hand reaches down out of old habit to pick that same load back up. If a particular face crossed your mind while you listened, this was probably meant to reach their shoulders too.